My recommendation to everybody is if you're going to buy a car, buy it the second year it comes out.
We've kind of mentioned a lot of different roles. So if you're
Hmm.
game, I'd kind of like
Yeah,
to walk through your career progression and kind of get some
sure.
insights and lessons learned. So you came out of school, you got a contract engineering job just to get a job, and then fast forward, you're at Nissan. And at
Hmm.
Nissan, as you talked about earlier, that's where you really got to kind of apply your master's and all your studies
Hmm.
and vibration. What was your biggest takeaway from your time working as a noise and vibration test engineer with Nissan?
I mean, the biggest thing that the first thing that comes to my mind is that what I learned in my master's can be applied to anything. That was kind of
Yeah.
the takeaway. Um, so I was an oddball at Nissan because I was the only one with a master's in vibration analysis. But I also had the largest number of programs. So like I had everything from like small cars to large trucks. Like, the shortest guy on the team had to scrabble up into the large trucks. You know, so like what I learned from there was it's just like it could be applied to everything, and how it's okay to there's this concept that I learned from my wife, the term I learned from my wife, which is object permanence. Are you familiar with this idea?
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
familiar with the fact that some animals don't have it, or a lot of animals don't have it. So, but I know I have it.
No, object permanence. Functional fixedness. Sorry, functional
Sorry.
fixedness. Are you familiar with that term?
No, I'm not familiar with that one. I
Okay,
know that my
okay, okay, okay.
dogs don't
Sorry,
have
sorry.
object permanence, despite me thinking sometimes that they do, but I don't know what functional, whatever the
Function,
hootie who,
functional
whatever you
fix,
just said.
functional fixedness is um, that every object has a function, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at a chair, you sit in the chair, but the chair could be turned into a fort if you were a little kid, right? Or it could turn into a step stool if you wanted to step on it and climb into something. Um, so like you have a screwdriver. The screwdriver is used to turn screws, but it can also be used as to create mechanical advantage. Um, so what I learned at Nissan was that like the tools that I had developed in grad school can be used in different ways, and that I don't necessarily have to do it in this one prescribed way, and that I also learned how to talk to other engineers. So like working with CAE, computer aided engineering, FEA guys, and kind of explaining, hey, this is the test side, you have the simulation side. Let's have a conversation. I got really good at communicating with my colleagues in Mexico and in Japan. Oftentimes we'd have like a three-way call where we're all speaking English. So that was kind of fun. But I also learned how to navigate the corporate world. I got really good. So like one of the jobs that the guys out in Mexico were tasked with is that they wanted to remove things. Okay, so you had countermeasures like hey, this thing made a noise. We put this thing on it. It no longer makes that noise. And they're like, hey, that thing costs 10 cents. I'd like to remove it so that we can save 10 cents per car. Yeah, later on. So it was never any safety things, but my recommendation to everybody is if you're going to buy a car, buy it the second year it comes out. First year they're still trying to figure out the bugs, and after the second year they try to cost reduce everything that they did to fix the bugs from the first year. So I learned that too. But so a lot of times I learned, hey, if they're asking to remove things, and I had to be firm and say, hey, no, you can't remove that, or like you can't ask me to remove one thing at a time, and it'd be like a death by a thousand paper cuts. Like give me a list of
Wow.
things that you want to remove at a time, and I'll tell you whether we can or not. Maybe we'll run a test, maybe not. And I had no problems like copying people and just being really obnoxious when like I was when they were I there were multiple times where like they'd send me something and I just copy and paste what they'd sent in a previous email and said per your email.
Wow. Yeah,
We cannot
that's
do that.
important, right? That's
Oh yeah.
100% important. Yeah.
Oh yeah,
That's cool.
navigating corporate is interesting, and doing it in three different countries, with people from different countries with their own cultural backgrounds is a challenge. Um,
Yeah, no, 100%.
but
As somebody who works in that space where we have JV partners from around the world, it's a big deal. So you navigated your way to Nissan, and then
yeah,
you then left and you became a systems engineer with Honeywell Aerospace.
yeah,
So, okay, noise and vibration test engineer to then systems engineer. I'm guessing systems engineer still related to noise and vibration though.
yes.
Yeah.
So what they were designing were basically struts to
Okay.
create like damping in 6 degrees of freedom on like
Yeah.
satellite parts and things that were
Okay.
going to be shot into outer space. So the
Nice.
testing I did, so I designed some stuff. I worked again with the FEA, CA guys. I ran some tests. Unfortunately, the way that Honeywell had structured themselves at that particular location is that they got paid for the hours worked by the engineers by the government. So they kind of encouraged people, sometimes demanded that people work more than 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week. And they wanted to pull projects ahead to the point that their clients wouldn't accept them because they're like, this is 2 months ahead of schedule. We do not have a place to hold this, so we're not going to take ownership of this. And they ran out of work for me to do. They sent me over to a different part of Honeywell where I um, used MATLAB and took somebody's job away from them by accident. Their whole job was to transfer data from one format to another, and I spent a week writing MATLAB code that would do it in like 10 minutes. I feel kind of bad that they probably came back from vacation.
Oh no.
they
So
probably
so
didn't
that,
use it. They probably didn't use it. To be fair,
yeah.
once they came back, they probably like, that's fine. I'm gonna go back to to what I was doing.
Yeah.
But then I got laid off because they literally ran out of work for me to do, um, and I was the last person hired.
Yeah. So that was a short stint for you. That was 2 years. So
Yeah.
do you mind sharing why you made the jump to Honeywell in the first place? What was what was the opportunity there for you?
So part of it, I mean, it was definitely a pay increase, but the
Yeah.
biggest thing, there are two things. One, I was a contract engineer at Nissan,
Yeah.
and that means that like there are certain benefits I didn't get as a full engineer. I was paid less because I was contract. My benefits were less, um, but also when you work for product development, you often see how the sausage is made,
Hmm.
and sometimes you don't like how the sausage is made.
Yeah.
Um, so it kind of wore down on me because not
Yeah.
that anything was unsafe. It was just more like there are things that I felt were not being done the correct way, the way that
Hmm.
would probably benefit the customers the best.
Yeah.
Um, analogy that was used there that I've seen elsewhere is kind of like you have this cliff and you want to get as close to the cliff as possible, and that would be like achieving like excellence without going over. So like how close can you get without actually committing to it? And there were times where I'd be like, hey, we need to do this. And they're like, no, we're not going to do that. And then 2 months later, like, oh crap, we need to do what you said. But because of where we are now, it's all bandages rather than designing it,
Yeah.
you know,
The right
which
way
is
from the beginning.
frustrating.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm very big on doing the work up front so that it's good, from the beginning rather than trying to fix it on the back end. Um, so between being a contract engineer and just frustrated about how things were done. And I
Yeah.
wasn't the only one.
Yeah.
And it just happens when you work for places. I jumped Honeywell, and like honestly, Honeywell was term, kind of a short term plan. Anyways, they're like, oh, this is a nice change of pace. It pays more money. It's a little
Yeah.
bit challenging. But uh, they had their own issues. Case in
Yeah.
point, I was laid off.
Yeah.
Um, And then,
Yeah. So then you were laid off, but then okay, I looked at your LinkedIn. 2016, laid off at Honeywell. 2016, hired at Stanley Black and Decker. So what was that process like for you after coming out of the layoff? I mean, what was that? How long did it
oh,
take you to find a new spot?
I would have. All right, so the funny part is that
Yeah.
I interviewed with Stanley Black and Decker before I got laid off
Okay,
because
look at you
I was
go.
bored. I was bored out of my mind, and I was like, this is horrible. Like I'm not doing what I'm actually supposed to be doing. Like, so I'm like, I started looking around. I applied to Black and Decker. Honeywell laid me off, and Black and Decker had a hiring freeze.
Oh no.
So I was just like, wait, what? So like I was just sat there. I was like, okay, I was applying for jobs, looking at places locally. I interviewed with this company out in New Jersey, and it was still vibration. What they did is they monitored like large industrial structures,
Mhm.
and they had like a
Hmm.
huge um what's the word I'm looking for? Range of area that they like territories that they sent their people out. So like the main base was in New Jersey, but they were looking for somebody to like look at like Long Island and like Brooklyn area. So like I flew out there, I had an interview. It sounded really interesting. It was a small business. They had some benefits. The pay wasn't as good as I would have liked, especially since it was in New Jersey and New York. Like it was below
It's expensive.
average. I always
Yeah.
recommend looking at the medium average cost of living wherever you're going, and like what the average pay for whatever job you're looking to get. And I was like, I need a job. This job sounds interesting, but also like a pain in the butt. I'm gonna call Black and Decker. So I was like, because I've been kind of, I'm like, hey, we had this interview. It sounded like you were interested.
Yeah.
You know, I recently interviewed with a company in New Jersey. I was thinking about accepting it, and I wanted to give you the option, the opportunity to make me an offer, and they did.
Nice.
Um,
So you really kind of manifested that basically as I'm trying
oh,
to fix my
oh, I,
microphone.
I totally leveraged the other job because like I was like, hey, this is the pay and it's like the pay was lower, but they had the benefits that kind of like so I was like, hey, this is the pay and benefits package. Can you do better than this? And they did. I was
Nice.
like, all right,
Nice.
excellent. So I moved to Maryland. They paid for me to relocate, or at least a chunk of that to relocate, which is nice.
Nice.
At that time, I'd met um my wife, though she wasn't my wife yet. She moved out to Maryland with me, and I worked
Wow.
at Black and Decker for 4.5 years or so.
And they're senior noise and vibration engineer, so you were doing same thing, testing
Same thing.
vibrations.
I was the vibration person. So like
Nice.
it was their test and development portion. We had a guy that did materials testing. We had a technician that did standard testing, and my job was to fix the random problems that came up. So like, hey, we have this part that keeps flying off, and we don't know why. We've been looking at it for 2 to 3 months. Like, oh, well, I can run some tests and tell you about that, and had a solution in like a week or two.
That's
um,
awesome. So I should feel very confident operating a Stanley or a Black& and Decker power tool because you were
Absolutely.
involved. Yes.
I mean, yes. I mean, not just because I was involved. There's some very smart engineers. Um, yes, DeWalt, Stanley, Black and Decker, Craftsman, they're all the same.
Yeah.
Craftsman is basically DeWalt that's like 3 or 4 years old.
Yeah.
Um, it's just kind of how it progresses.
Yeah.
But we don't.
S-
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they would never listen and they'd never consider sponsoring the podcast anyway. So here's a personal question here. So at my
Sure.
university, we partnered with Goodwill Industries of San Antonio regularly, and they had this maintenance division that would come to us with their problems, and we,
Hmm.
help them do an inventory system or a system for mm, cutting labels and improving that process, or lifting and tilting Gaylord boxes to inspect them with like miniature cranes. But one of the projects that they kept on coming back to us for
Okay.
was a one-hand operated chainsaw. A chainsaw that you could safely operate and dampen the vibration so that you could safely operate and safely control a chainsaw with one hand. Now, as a noise and vibration engineering expert, what do you think about that ask? Is it a reasonable ask for the human body for you to design an engineering system that can stabilize a chainsaw that it can be operated with one hand? Because we thought all of
So,
us really wanted to
uh,
that project was the project that was regularly just never picked up because none of us wanted the liability, or it was just a terrifying concept to all of us. And this was like sophomore design, so this was sophomore engineering students that had this concept pitched to them. So what do you think?
so I mean, the first thought that I have is that I don't like chainsaws. Like, I
I
don't know
hate
if you have you
chainsaws.
ever used a chainsaw? That,
No,
that,
because I don't like them.
so 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 they're not very. Now, I am not an expert in them by any means, so please don't, like, anybody come after me for this. But in general, like, you have a chain that's rotating around and it has to be oiled, and the reason why a lot of them have two hands is because it's a safety thing. You have to squeeze one thing, before you can turn it on, so you have control over it.
Yeah.
Um, if if you're looking for a one-handed chainsaw, so something that is small enough to hold in one hand that can still cut with what you're looking for, I believe that's called a reciprocating saw. They have a little blade that goes on, so
Yeah.
like, and those can be designed so that it doesn't have too much vibration. You put a counterbalance in it. You put different blades in it. Like Black and Decker was doing a whole bunch of like how do you design the best blade so that it cuts out the perfect amount so that you get the most bang for your buck. So a reciprocating saw is way better than a chainsaw, especially if you're trying to do it one-handed. So
Yeah.
that's my take on it.
So
Is that
don't
there is a
modify a
fix to
chainsaw
it.
to use one hand.
Don't modify. Yeah, just use a reciprocating saw that's designed for one hand.
Okay, I'm gonna clip that and send that to the head of our engineering department. I'll be like, "Dear Dr. Arminian, love y'all lots. Why was this a project?" And no, I love my engineering department. I
Yeah.
strong advocate for the program, and I do my
Oh,
best
for
to
sure.
connect their students with jobs and all that stuff. But that was just so funny, and I look back on that. I'm like, and even at the time, we were like, "Come on, this is a crazy concept." So back to the dude. We've had
Yeah.
more dovetails than a dove. We a dove more dovetails than the King Ranch. So you were there for 4 years,
A little over four. Yeah.
2016 to 2020, a little over 4 years.
Yeah.
What was your progression while you were there for 4 years? Was it kind of just the same specialist role, or did you kind of grow into it? I mean, what was your what was your experience like being there? Because you were there for 4 years, and you talk about it very, very highly. So I'm just curious what that experience was like for you.
So like, yeah, I mean, it was really funny because they hired me on as a senior engineer,
Hmm.
but apparently when they did the paperwork for it, I might not have actually been hired on as a senior engineer because then I got a promotion like halfway through as to a senior engineer, which is funny
Yes.
because I was making senior engineering money. Like, sure,
Yes, please
fine.
create another tier
Um,
for me to make even more money. Thank you.
Yes, exactly. So, like, in most things, I feel like it takes about a year or two to really get comfortable with things. Like you find the ins and outs of things, you work on projects, and a lot of times projects repeat or problems repeat. So, like, after like the first 2 years, like I had enough background to go like, oh, I remember working on something similar. Let's look at this. Or, hey, like, I know how things are going to work. I recommend that we approach this in X way.
Hmm.
Um, so like it was fun. I liked working there. I liked working with most of the people there. Um, Once again, same issue that I had at Nissan in that there are things that kind of popped up. There's just like, I'm not really a fan of how this is, but like it's especially when you have something where you have like a low, medium, high tier like product disbursement. Yeah, you're not going to
Yeah.
put the same amount of money you put in your bottom end drill as you put in your top end drill.
Yeah.
That's just kind of how it works. Um, so yeah, it was interesting. It was definitely and like in getting and working with people and like working with the project team so that like once you show them, hey, like look, I can fix this problem. One time they come back to you and say, hey, I had this other problem, and I love like finding out like why something's breaking or like what the design issue was, and so,
Yeah.
is it a design issue or is it a build issue or did manufacturing do something weird? You know, I probably would have stayed longer, um, but the pandemic hit and we worked from home, and that was fine. I'd work from home and go into the office to run tests and come back home and process data, when I didn't need to be in the office.
Yeah.
But Black and Decker decided that we were going to work, cut our hours by 20%. So we didn't work on Fridays, which was fine, except for the fact that we didn't make that money. And then they had record profits. And then they paid out like millions of dollars to their stockholders. And I
Yeah.
just really felt really unhappy about that.
Yeah. That
Um,
makes sense. Yeah.
they were talking about trying to like reduce costs over like the next 2 years by like $10 million, and then the 10 million. It wasn't 10. It was like 50 million. It was a large number, but then they gave out like a fifth of that to their stockholders and like dividends, and it's just like wait a second.
Wait,
You're
I
gonna
took a
make money
20%
off.
pay cut for that.
Right. For that, yeah, basically. Yeah. Well, they let go of their a couple divisions that they were ahead of. Like, oh, we're going to lay them off. They can get money. We'll hire them back when we need them because we're ahead of the competitors. And then all those people found jobs elsewhere because why would they wait around?
Yeah.
So that was a frustrating thing. And I also had a slight issue with my manager, or not my manager. My manager was great. My previous manager, who became director,
Yeah.
shifted a lot of work onto me. That
Yeah.
was his without actually clearly communicating that.
Yeah.
Um, and then and when I didn't do what he wanted to do, he stopped talking to me, which was very weird and toxic. Like
Yeah.
not like I'd walk into a room and he would suddenly turn his body away from me and not acknowledge that I walked into the room. And like
Yeah.
you would think that maybe I'm just kind of paranoid that I'm making this up, except for uh, previously he had commented how he likes to screw with people by doing this, by not talking to them. So
Yeah,
like
that's not
I'm like
good.
this
Cultural,
isn't
not a
good.
cultural fit anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, and like it really like is a good portion of it was the manager, and then the rest of it was some of the decisions that they made. So I switched over to Simutech, which is a smaller company that has me doing jobs all over the place.
Yeah. So you left R&D, which I think that it was one of those things that you kind of observed the same cultural things that you didn't
Yeah.
like, and then you moved over to Simutech, which is consulting. So how's that switch into the consulting space been for you?
So it's still kind of R&D. It's
Okay.
just I'm not in charge of the projects anymore. So I don't see the same projects all the time. Um, but it's interesting. I
Yeah.
a little bit to be fair, a little bit lacking in that consulting questions are usually not as deep as internal questions, right? So a lot of like our testing that we provide is for companies that don't have test departments, right?
Mhm.
Or they need overflow. So the questions that they're asking are maybe not as complicated
Mhm.
as questions I would have as an internal customer, right? Hey, I have this one thing that's breaking off, a bunch. How do we fix it? Whereas like a customer that comes to us who's like, hey, we're noticing that something is failing, you know, but we don't really have a lot of information about it. It happens occasionally. It seems to happen, maybe when it's colder outside, but we're not really sure. So we don't
Yeah.
have as much information. So they don't have the same internal structure to kind of track those problems and dig
Yeah.
into them, which is what they ask us. Um, but it is interesting in that I get to work on a bunch of different things. And this job has sent me into nuclear power plants, gas, coal power plants. I've been to the top of inside wind turbines, into the blades of wind turbines, and install sensors.
Nice.
Um, Working on solar panels. I've done stuff on planes where I've taken vibration data on jets, um, as well as like beard trimmers and baggage scanners. Like, a
So
little bit of
cool.
everything.
Yeah.
So, and like that is the breadth of work is really interesting. But I do the there is the added complication of the fact that the job is also at the whim and scheduling of the customer. So a
Yeah.
lot of times things don't happen when they're supposed to happen. Like, oh, we're going to schedule this the first week in March, and then it ends up being randomly the second week in May. And you don't
Yeah.
find out until the first week in May that that's when it's actually going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
It,
know.
it it definitely consulting is one of those industries where your life kind of can get because that's when
Oh
they
yeah.
need you, right? Yeah. That's
Oh
when they
yeah.
need you.
And
Yeah.
like, and I thought it was cool with that. But I have a 18 month at home, my
Yeah.
first kiddo, and I don't like being away randomly. So I actually gave my like 2 weeks notice last Friday, so I have
Oh
a
my
week left.
gosh.
Yeah, I got another job,
Yeah.
um, locally in Rochester, at an aerospace company doing the same thing, noise vibration testing. I'm actually not entirely sure what the job is entailing, not because I don't know. How do I put this? So like I don't do any analysis afterwards because they have somebody to do that. They have
Hmm.
somebody to do simulation and like to put the sensors on because this is going to outer space and it's going in a clean room. Like that's done off site. So I'm like, you're telling me I'm only doing like 30% of the job, like, and reading a lot of test procedures. That's what it sounds like to me. I'm like, oh, that's easy.
Yeah. That's cool. Man, I did not even know that. I mean, I guess when we
Yeah,
booked this
yeah,
interview, you hadn't even put in your notice yet.
yeah,
So, wow, that
yeah.
that is I could tell you were going somewhere with that, and I'm just complete. This is a engineering success podcast first, uh, broadcasting your resignation for the first time to the world on my podcast. Breaking. It's basically like LeBron James is the decision, but it's on the engineering success podcast.
Sure,
that is
yeah,
that is something, and I totally get it, man. I totally get it. I've lived in San Antonio happily for the last 7 years, and now I'm in New Orleans. So
right. Well,
I totally get it, man.
yeah,
And even this is easier because at least I'm here. And as somebody who
right.
we're expecting our first kid in less than 2 months, I totally understand not wanting to be away. I totally get that. So that's really could man. So how'd you that was the decision point. I'm caught off guard to be honest. So but it sounds like you're
Sorry.
excited for it. No, you're good. It sounds like
Uh,
you're excited for it.
so I'm not entirely sure how excited I am for it. So I moved up to Rochester for this job that I currently have with every intention of staying at this job for years
Mm,
to come. And there was a cultural shift from working remotely because I was working remotely for like the first 2 years at this job. Um, and which worked out really well because my wife is pregnant and then we had our first kid and there were complications, so I was able to be home to assist while also working, and like also like be a parent all around. So like even though I left for work to travel, like I was still like when I was working from home, like I could have lunch with my kiddo. I could
yeah.
go upstairs and like watch her for 15 minutes while my wife did stuff during the middle of the day. But when I moved up to Rochester, the expectations were not clearly conveyed to me,
Yeah.
and it's just been kind of a struggle. And the new job I'm excited for. I have every confidence that I could do the job. I'm really happy about it. But to be fair, I'm happier that I negotiated. Well, the recruiter was amazing. I have a decent pay bump with a sign-on bonus that I wasn't even expecting. Um, but I also negotiated that even though I gave my 2 weeks notice last Friday, which means that next Friday is my last day at my current job, I don't start at my new job until July 10th. So
That's gonna be great. Yeah.
I have not taken like I've not had time off in between jobs really. Like I keep saying I'm going to do it, and then every job's like we need you to stay longer, and the other job's like we need you right away. So it's like
Yeah.
well, boom, like I just kept going and going and going, and even when I'm the current job, because of the nature of consulting, like I don't know the last time I had a time off where I was not like also randomly pulled into a phone call or like Yep, yep. Even when I was moving up to Rochester, I was trying to write a report on something. So like I supposed to be time off, like driving up to Rochester from Baltimore. All my stuff is in a pack rat coming up. I have a U-Haul, two dogs, a baby, and my wife in the car. Drive up, sign the papers for the house that we just bought. Move in, drive into the house, and I'm like the next day trying to work on this report, and just trying
Yeah.
to juggle things. So like I am looking forward to having some time off, settle into my house a little bit more,
Yeah.
get into a routine.
That's
And
exciting.
the
And
new job, the new job also has like a weird like 80 hours and 9 day schedule. So every other Friday I should
yeah.
have off, which means that every other Friday is a 3-day weekend.
Yeah.
And I'm happy about that too.
Yeah. I think we call those 980s is what we call them.
Yeah, 980s, yeah.
Yeah, our engineering partner on our current project, they all work 980s, which is cool, but at the field we work 510s. So every other Friday we don't have any input from our engineering partner, so it's a little bit okay. No, no. What actually happens is they still work. Sucks for them that they don't get their benefit, but we really appreciate them. Uh, but yeah, man, that's cool. That's exciting. I'm happy for you. So you've had a really, I'd say, normal career progression. You've had one, two, three, four or five companies. You've changed jobs
Mhm.
every 2 to 4 years, 5 years.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty normal career progression. Thank you so much for watching this segment of the Engineering Success Podcast. If you liked it, make sure to check out the other videos down below that are recommended to you. And if you really like the podcast, make sure to subscribe right down there in the middle. We really appreciate it. It's free to you and helps us a lot out. And last but not least, the best way to help the show grow is to comment down below. So leave your comment if you have any thoughts about this segment. Thanks.
Chasing payments, still playing in the basement while I'm working on arrangements. They heard the kid in 50 countries, thank God that's amazing. But I'd rather thank Spotify, they put me on the station.